Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Heroes of the Faith, Fall 2020. This is our Unit 1-1 lesson, which this unit is called Introduction to the Ancient Near East. And so we'll be talking about that today as we explore the idea of covenant, as we also explore how God would use Abraham, as you see in this picture, one man to become a tribe, and then eventually to become a nation, and how he would take that nation to redeem the world. And so we're gonna take some time and look at that. There are a couple videos that are attached to this today, so I want you to, as we're going along, we're probably going to have to either watch those later to get information from it, or pause it and come back to this and then answer. And so the way it's designed, you'll be able to watch all three. There will be questions in Edpuzzle, so be prepared for that. But as you go through it, but all this should connect. If you have some trouble pulling anything up, let me know. But just make sure that you use those videos to take good notes on this information. Okay, let's get started. So today, like I told you, you'll be assessed. Either you have been assessed or you will be assessed over last chapter. So put that into your into Moodle, so you can click on that and take that quick. I call it a quest because it's like a quiz test. It's very small, but it's not it's in between. And so you'll take that through Moodle, and then today's lesson we're going to describe God's redemption plan from a people into a nation, and then into the world. And then the goal is for you to understand Israel was to be God's new holy people, living in a holy place and spreading the redemption to the world. And so this is sort of a Old Testament overview before we get into the New Testament. And so I know I'm giving you the Old Testament in literally 6 units, but then we'll get into the New Testament for the rest of the year, semester. Okay, so now there's a Bible Project video that you need to watch to understand covenant and why that's important. And so make sure you watch that. There'll be little questions that go along with that in Edpuzzle, and then you can go ahead and continue this video. Okay, now as explained in the video, a covenant is in a way a contract or a promise between one party and another. And so in the video, we see that God made a covenant with man, but the man kept breaking it. And so God realized that he had to be the one to not just give out the covenant, but he also had to be the one to fulfill the agreement, And so again, the covenant is like a contract. If you were to buy, if you were to think about a contract, contracts are used for several things. You use a contract to buy a house, because you go and you borrow money from a bank and you sign a contract saying that I'm going to fulfill and pay this loan. You go and buy a car, same thing. You get a contract when you're married. You have to get a marriage license to do the exact same thing. If you break any of those contracts, you could lose the house. You could lose your car. And also, even with a marriage, you would, and then a divorce, you could lose half of what you own to your former spouse. So we get contracts. It's sort of the same thing going on here in the ancient Near East, but it was deeper. And so the notes here are going to explain that. But before we get there, when it comes to the idea of a covenant, I want to explain the covenant real quick. So I'm going to go back here real quick. So the covenant in the Bible, which the video did not explain, which is fine. The Bible Project is good, but I'm going to give you a little bit more. But the covenant was interesting because in the ancient Near East, they saw the covenant as a manner of life and death. And I'll explain. For example, you have a higher power in agreement with a lower power. So imagine that there's this tiny kingdom with a tiny king, and this king is always getting attacked by a rival tribe or a kingdom, because they have a lustrous garden, lustrous agriculture, and they're doing well. Well, this tiny king is friends with a larger kingdom, And he asked, and they have a huge military, and they're doing well, and nobody messes with them. So the tiny king will go to the larger kingdom and to ask the big king and say, hey, look, I'm going to cut you a deal. I want to make a covenant with you. I want you to protect me, and in return, I will give you a portion of my crops. And the kings both agree, and they shake hands. And you think that would be it? Well, then there's a ritual that happens along with this covenant. What they do is that they take a particular animal of their choice, being a cow or whatever it may be, a horse. Hopefully it's not a horse, but whatever it was, more likely it was a cow or some sort of livestock that was healthy. And they would take it, slaughter it, kill it, and then cut it in half. And so the carcass of the cow would lie open, and one party, the smaller king will walk through as one party, saying, quoting this, saying, "If I break my covenant, may what happened to this cow happen to me." And then the other king would walk back through the bigger king or the larger king will walk back the opposite way, saying the exact same thing. May what happened to this cow happen to me if I break this covenant. And so that was how things were done. Not just with kingdoms, but also with farmers or just your everyday worker. They would do the same thing. They would make a covenant in that way. And so now, being that man is who man is, there were times where people would break the covenant. So let's say a scenario, smaller king is still getting attacked even after the deal is done. And he goes to the king, and he says, "Hey, you didn't fulfill you're not protecting me, and I've been giving you all my crops and things like that. You're not protecting me." Well, who in this particular situation is supposed to die? The larger king. But since the larger king is larger and things are not fair and mankind is who they are, the larger king says, you know what? No, who are you to come to me? I'm going to, one, not only take all your crops, I'm going to have you killed for coming at me and tell me I'm not fulfilling my end of the bargain. That's usually what happened. Now, vice versa, if the smaller kingdom didn't take care of their side of the bargain, they would have died, and it would have been okay. I mean, it would have been part of the contract. But at times, because this person has power and has authority in a way over the smaller kingdom, they sometimes abuse that power, and things are just not fair. Well, in the story of Abraham, we see that God makes a covenant with him. In Genesis, Abraham comes from a desolate land. Abraham is literally lost. He comes from a town called Ur, which is basically a small town or a city, or it's actually the capital of this place called ancient Babylon. They were known for this tower that they built called the Tower of Babel. And what happened is that one day they were building this tower, and all of a sudden, by miraculous means, who knows what it was, God, they all started speaking different languages, and they all began to scatter. And when people scatter, can a city thrive? No, because when people leave, the economy drops, and then there you go. So Abraham was left in a abandoned city with his family. His dad ends up dying, so Abraham doesn't have anything to go on. But matter of fact, his wife can't have kids. The land he has isn't his; it's actually his brother's, because his brother was older. But his brother dies and leaves it in his hands for a time until his nephew Lot gets older to take it back. So the land he has is not his. He has no kids. He has no legacy. And when a person has no legacy, their name will die away, and they'll just become somebody, a nameless person in history. But here comes God, and so God will take Abraham and make a covenant with him. And if you have time to read that particular chapter, I believe it's chapter 15 in Genesis, you'll see that God does the exact same thing with Abraham. He makes a covenant. It says, hey, if you follow me, I'm going to give you the number of the stars. Number of the stars. and you won't have to worry about and anybody who hurts you, I will curse. Anyone who blesses you, I will bless. And Abraham says, deal. And they were like, okay, let's make a covenant. Saying they do the exact same thing like I told you. They take 7 different animals this time, and they cut them all in half. And then, Abraham does it. God instructs him to do that. And Abraham waits for God and waits till he falls asleep. Abraham goes to sleep angrily because he's like, where is God in all this? And he falls asleep. And when he wakes up, he notices that there's been 2 sets of footprints that have walked in and out of the carcasses. And who do you think walked through? It was God. So God walked through twice. He walked through once and said, if I break my promise, may this happen to me. But then he also took Abraham's particular oath, and he walks through for Abraham and says, if Abraham breaks his promise, may what was supposed to happen to him happen to me. Redemption. And honestly, guys, that's foreshadowing for what Jesus would do for all of us. He takes on our sin. You see what I'm saying? God uses culture to redeem who he is to us and his redemption plan. So let's move on. All right, we're going. This is video that you connect this next handout. It's called Kingdom of God. So basically, you're going to go to Moodle and click on the Kingdom of God link, and this will come out. And then you're also going to watch the video that says Unfolding Kingdom of God. I believe it's going to say that video, Unfolding Kingdom. No, it's not. It's going to say Kingdom of God video, and you'll follow along with their prompts to fill this in. And so we'll use this on our Unit 1 test, okay? All right. Now, let's talk about this real quick, and then we'll be done. Real quick, hold on one second. So, in the Old Testament, God's original plan was through Israel. So God wanted to use the people of Israel to redeem and aid in redeeming the nations of the world as Adam and Eve failed to obey God. And they were exiled. They disobeyed, which led into exile. So, let me rephrase. Let me read that again. So God, as you saw in the last video, God tried to use Adam and Eve as a means of redeeming the world. Well, because of their sin, the idea of making the world holy, being a holy people, making it a holy world, it went opposite, and sin came into the world. So he met Noah, and Noah was, and his family were supposed to be that same thing after the flood, supposed to redeem the world too, a holy people in a holy world. Well, that didn't work. And then he meets Abraham, and his theory was, I'm going to make Abraham a holy nation that's going to be an example to all the other nations. Because by the time Israel was growing, there were empires, had already been established, but some of them were becoming huge, like the Egyptian Empire. So then we get the nation of the Moses nation, and so they grow. And so the idea is that, again, in the beginning it was creation. In the middle of this redemption plan is Israel. And Israel is supposed to be the nation that follows God and to be an example to other nations so they can follow God too. But in the end, what happens? Israel goes into exile. Israel goes into exile because they sinned. They disobeyed God. So, there we go. Now, we see this pattern again too. In the next slide, we have Abraham. Abraham was not a he didn't know who God was. God came to him and revealed himself to him, and Abraham followed him. And so Abraham descendants grow into a kingdom. And so we see that the pinnacle of all this was David and Solomon's temple. David was God's right-hand man, so, God's second anointed king. Solomon failed, and David took over and became God's right-hand man who followed God. It was a man after God's own heart. And then his son Solomon was the one who actually created the temple, made the temple that God had a plan for all the way back in his idea. He had a plan for all the way back in Exodus with Moses and his people. Anyway, but as I told you, there was a great, rebellion against God, and what ended up happening is that the Israelites began to turn away, and the result of that was that Israel will be going to exile. Now, if you know exile, the word term exile means to be kicked out or to be driven away from one's land or taken from one's land. And so next unit, we'll talk about this particular, I'm sorry, not next unit, next lesson, we'll talk about this particular exile and how the Israelites, were taken from their land and who took them. And we'll learn about these particular empires who took them and how God, even through exile, even through all of that, took care of them and made their exile a part of his redemption plan. Okay, guys, thank you for watching today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will catch you tomorrow.